The U.S. water supply is struggling under the combined pressures of drought, aging infrastructure, thirsty AI data centers, and over-extraction.
Lake Mead towers over the desert as the largest reservoir in the United States. It feeds Las Vegas, a city that could not exist without its water and power. Every drop that fills Lake Mead comes from the Colorado River, the lifeline that cuts through canyons and deserts to reach millions of people. Yet the surface of the lake keeps falling, its white bathtub ring creeping lower each year. But Lake Mead is not the only one. Upstream lies Lake Powell, held back by the Glen Canyon Dam, providing water and electricity to Arizona, Utah, and beyond. Farther along the river stand Lake Mohave, Lake Havasu, and other vital reservoirs that supply Phoenix, Tucson, Los Angeles, and countless farms. All of them are losing water. In 2022, Lake Mead dropped to its lowest level since it was first filled in the 1930s. Lake Powell fell to a similar low, forcing dam operators to warn that turbines could stop. The causes go beyond drought. Arizona allowed foreign companies to pump aquifers and ship crops overseas. Cities approved sprawling suburbs. At the same time, they built data centers that consume millions of gallons just to cool servers. Decades of overuse and political deals turned the river into a system that cannot keep its promises. If the reservoirs keep sinking, entire cities could become unlivable. What once built the Southwest could now bring it to the brink. How did a system that once promised endless growth turn into a looming crisis? Can cities, farms, and industries survive if these reservoirs fail? In this video, we will look at the rise of the Colorado River reservoirs, the reasons they are collapsing, and what the future might hold for the American Southwest. But before we start, here's a little question to entertain you. What U.S. state is home to the largest desalination plant in the country? A. California. B. Texas. C. Florida. D. Hawaii. Share your opinion in the comments and patiently watch this video till the end to find out the truth. Falling levels. Lake Mead was once seen as the ultimate prize of the American desert. Built in the 1930s after the completion of the Hoover Dam, it became the largest reservoir in the United States and a symbol of triumph over a hostile landscape. Its waters made Las Vegas possible, fueled farms across Nevada and California, and delivered security to millions of people across the Southwest. For decades, the lake seemed untouchable, always large enough to meet whatever demands were placed upon it. Today, that illusion has been shattered. The surface of Lake Mead has dropped more than 150 feet compared to its high point in the 1980s. The pale scars on the canyon walls, often called bathtub rings, mark each level the water has left behind. In 2022, the reservoir fell to its lowest point since the 1930s, leaving boat ramps stranded on dry land and exposing canyons that had been hidden for generations. At full capacity, Lake Mead once held about 28.9 million acre-feet, which is equal to roughly 35 cubic kilometers of water. To put that into perspective, it is the same as more than 50 million standard school swimming pools. It is also close to the total amount of water California uses in an entire year. Today, less than 1/3 of that remains, and every season the margin shrinks further. But the problem doesn't stop there. Lake Powell, created in the 1960s by the Glen Canyon Dam, has endured the same fate. It was once nearly 200 miles long and the second largest reservoir in the country. Now its capacity has shrunk to less than 1/4, exposing vast stretches of sandstone that had been underwater since the dam was built. In 2022, water dropped so low that officials warned hydroelectric turbines could stop turning altogether. If the surface falls below a critical point, the dam cannot generate electricity. That would cut off power for millions who have long depended on cheap energy from the river. For local communities, it means higher costs, fewer options, and the loss of something that once felt permanent. The smaller lakes downstream, including Lake Mohave and Lake Havasu, have also shown the same decline. These reservoirs supply water to Phoenix, Tucson, Los Angeles, and the fields of the Imperial Valley. The pattern repeats everywhere. Levels fall, shorelines retreat, and the system that once looked endless now appears fragile. Marinas that once held hundreds of boats now sit on dry ground. Tourist businesses that thrived on recreation now struggle with fewer visitors. Even in good snow years in the Rockies, the gains are small compared to decades of loss. Scientists had raised concerns long before the current crisis. In the early 1990s, researcher Peter Gleich warned that the Colorado River system had been overallocated and that climate shifts would cut supplies further. His studies showed that legal promises to cities and farms exceeded what the river could realistically deliver. At the time, those warnings were set aside as development and growth continued, but today the falling levels of Lake Mead and Lake Powell prove how accurate they were. The lesson is painful. Ignoring the data did not buy security, it only delayed the reckoning. The scale of the loss is hard to exaggerate. Together, Lake Mead and Lake Powell once stored nearly 60 cubic kilometers of water. That is more than enough to serve entire states for years at a time. The fact that 2/3 of it is gone is a warning of what lies ahead. Each drop lost is not just a number on a chart. It means less electricity, less food, and less growth for a region that once relied on these lakes as a permanent guarantee. Hydroelectric power has already suffered. Hoover Dam, which once produced enough energy for nearly 2 million homes, is running at reduced capacity. Glen Canyon Dam is in the same position. Farmers who once counted on steady irrigation now face shorter planting cycles or must abandon fields altogether. Cities that built entire suburbs in the desert now face water restrictions and tighter controls on development. The promise of endless expansion is gone, replaced with tough questions about survival. Families who moved for sunshine and opportunity now face restrictions on something as basic as turning on the tap. What makes the situation even more sobering is that recovery is unlikely. A single wet season can lift levels a little, but it cannot undo decades of decline. The system is too vast and the deficit is too deep. Scientists note that the Colorado River Basin is now in one of the driest periods in more than 1,000 years. Even when snowpacks improve, the structural shortage remains. What was once seen as a temporary drought has revealed itself as a long-term crisis. How long have you lived in the Southwest? Are you ready for water shortages in your region? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know. Before we continue, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. And now, let's dive in. Dams to glory. The Colorado River was never a calm stream that could be trusted to behave. For centuries it was unpredictable, shrinking to a trickle in dry years and then surging into a violent torrent that wiped out towns and farms. Settlers in the 19th century quickly learned that this river could not be counted on to follow any steady rhythm. When the floods came, irrigation canals were destroyed, fields vanished under brown water, and whole communities were swept away. When the dry seasons returned, and the same communities were left with dust and cracked earth. Controlling the river was not just a dream of progress, but a matter of survival. The picture of the Southwest before Hoover Dam looked very different from what people know today. At the dawn of the 20th century, Las Vegas was little more than a railroad stop with fewer than 1,000 residents. Phoenix was still an agricultural town relying on irrigation ditches and the unpredictable Salt River. Los Angeles was growing quickly but faced constant shortages, pushing engineers to import water through early aqueducts. Farmers in the Imperial Valley of California were trying to cultivate desert lands, but every major flood or drought threatened to wipe out their efforts. In 1905, a break in a canal fed by the Colorado created the Salton Sea by accident, flooding farmland and proving that the river could not be left unchecked. The chaos showed clearly that the booming cities and fields of the Southwest would not survive without a massive project to tame the Colorado once and for all. The federal government took its first decisive step in 1902 with the passage of the Reclamation Act. This law created the Bureau of Reclamation and gave it authority to build large projects across the arid West. The purpose was simple: to transform unpredictable rivers into engines of growth through dams, reservoirs, and canals. The Colorado River soon became the centerpiece of this vision. Without a system to tame its floods and store its water, the growing towns of California, Arizona, and Nevada would always live at the mercy of the desert. The story of the dams has its own cast of characters, like the industrial dramas of the Gilded Age. Arthur Powell Davis, chief engineer at the Bureau of Reclamation, first proposed placing a massive dam in Black Canyon. He saw that the narrow gorge and solid rock walls could hold back a sea of water. Herbert Hoover, then Secretary of Commerce, played the role of political broker. He negotiated the Colorado River Compact in 1922, dividing water between 7 states and making the project legally possible. And Frank Crow, known as Hurry Up Crow, became the relentless builder. He drove the construction forward at a pace few thought possible, turning vision into reality. The first jewel of the system was Hoover Dam, authorized in 1928 at the height of the Great Depression. Construction began in Black Canyon, right on the border of Nevada and Arizona. Engineers chose this site because the gorge was narrow and the volcanic rock could bear the weight of a massive concrete wall. Thousands of workers poured into the desert, battling extreme heat and dangerous conditions. By 1936, the dam was finished, standing more than 700 feet high, the largest concrete structure in the world at the time. Behind it spread Lake Mead, which became the largest reservoir in the United States. This lake supplied water to Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and the fertile Imperial Valley. It also generated hydroelectric power that lit up the growing cities of the Southwest. The triumph of Hoover Dam did not end the story. After World War II, population boomed and farmland expanded. The single reservoir at Lake Mead was no longer enough to secure the future. Engineers turned their attention upstream to the canyons of northern Arizona. Glen Canyon was chosen for its narrow walls of strong sandstone, perfect for holding back an immense volume of water. Construction of Glen Canyon Dam began in 1956, and by 1963, the work was complete. Behind it rose Lake Powell, a reservoir nearly 200 miles long. Its purpose was not only to generate power but also to act as a giant savings bank of water, a buffer against drought for Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. The scale was staggering. Lake Powell alone could hold more than 24 million acre-feet of water, enough to secure supplies for millions of people. Other reservoirs followed, each with its own role. In 1938, Parker Dam was finished, creating Lake Havasu. That reservoir became the starting point for the California Aqueduct, sending Colorado River water directly to Los Angeles. In 1951, Davis Dam was completed, forming Lake Mohave. It provided steady flow for communities along the lower river and supplied irrigation to farms across the desert valleys. Together, these projects formed a ladder of water, one reservoir passing supplies to the next, ensuring that no drop was wasted on its journey to Mexico. Every decision about where to build followed the same logic. Engineers searched for narrow canyons where thick rock walls could bear the pressure of millions of tons of water. Each lake had a specific purpose. Lake Mead provided stability for Nevada, California, and Arizona. Lake Powell gave the upper basin states a tool to balance drought. Lake Havasu connected directly to California's thirsty cities. Lake Mohave sustained local farms and communities along the lower river. None of these choices were random. Each site was a calculated step in transforming a wild desert river into a regulated machine of water and power. The effect was revolutionary. The dams gave life to cities that otherwise could not exist. They turned Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles into centers of growth. They created farmland in places where rain almost never falls. They delivered hydroelectric power to homes and industries across the West. For decades, it seemed as if the Colorado River had finally been conquered. The wild floods were gone. The dry years were tamed, and the desert itself was turned into a garden of concrete and steel. The cascade of Hoover, Glen Canyon, Parker, and Davis dams marked the true beginning of the modern Southwest. If you had been living in the Southwest a century ago, would you have supported building massive dams, knowing how the story has turned out today? Share what you think in the comments. Our team needs your help. Subscribe to our channel to help more people learn the truth about current events. And now, we move on. Water eaters. Agriculture has always been the largest consumer of Colorado River water. Nearly 70% of the river's supply is used to irrigate fields across the Southwest. The Imperial Valley in California and the Central Valleys of Arizona turned from barren desert into vast oases only because of this water. Today, millions of acres produce alfalfa, cotton, lettuce, citrus, and vegetables that supply stores across the United States. Without the river, none of these crops would exist in such volume. But the scale of this farming comes at an immense cost. 1 acre of alfalfa in Arizona can require enough water to supply a family of 4 for an entire year. When multiplied by the millions of acres grown in the desert, the numbers become staggering. Alfalfa has become one of the most controversial crops because it is so water-intensive, and yet much of it does not even stay in the United States. In Arizona, a Saudi Arabian company purchased thousands of acres of farmland. It drilled into underground aquifers, pumping out precious groundwater to grow alfalfa. The harvest was then shipped across the ocean to feed cattle in Saudi Arabia. For many residents, this became a symbol of how fragile the system had become. While local communities face restrictions, foreign companies could legally drain water and export the results abroad. This controversy in Arizona sharpened the larger conflict between farmers and cities. Urban leaders argue that agriculture wastes too much water on crops like alfalfa that bring little benefit to local people. Farmers counter that without them, there would be no food for those same cities to survive. The produce grown in the desert fills grocery shelves across the country, and the alfalfa that looks wasteful on paper feeds the dairy and beef industries that millions of households depend on. If farms are forced to close, the price of food would rise sharply and imports would take their place. That would not only weaken local economies, but also leave the nation dependent on foreign suppliers. In this sense, every suburb and skyscraper is balanced on the silent work of farmers in the desert. Cities, however, cannot be ignored. Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles have grown at astonishing rates over the past century, and each relies heavily on the Colorado River. Phoenix was once a small agricultural town, but is now home to more than 4 million people. Las Vegas grew from a dusty stop on the railroad into a sprawling valley with nearly 3 million residents. Los Angeles, already large in the early 20th century, exploded into a global metropolis, powered in part by water imported from hundreds of miles away. These cities use Colorado River water for drinking, industry, recreation, and to sustain millions of homes. They point out that farms cannot thrive without functioning urban centers to buy, process, and distribute what is grown. A field of lettuce has little value if there are no roads, factories, and markets to carry it to consumers. The rivalry between farms and cities is not only about numbers, but also about values. Farmers argue that food security is the first requirement for survival. City leaders reply that economic strength and innovation also determine survival. Both sides hold part of the truth, and yet both are competing for the same shrinking supply. With each year of drought, compromise becomes harder. What began as cooperation in the era of dam building has now become open conflict about who deserves the river's water more. As if that conflict was not enough, a new competitor has arrived: the technology industry. Over the past decade, the Southwest has become a hub for massive data centers. Companies chose this region for its cheap land, wide open spaces, and abundant sunshine that supports solar power. But few outside the industry realize how much water these facilities consume. Servers generate enormous amounts of heat, and cooling them requires constant flows of water. Microsoft's data center in Goodyear, Arizona, disclosed that it could use up to 56 million gallons of potable water each year, the same as about 670 local households. Google's planned campus in Mesa requested permission for up to 4 million gallons per day, enough to supply thousands of homes. For a region already struggling with scarcity, these numbers land like a shock. The rise of artificial intelligence has only made this demand greater. Training advanced models requires immense computing power, far beyond what traditional web services needed. That means more servers, more cooling, and more water. In 2023, U.S. data centers consumed an estimated 17.4 billion liters of water, nearly triple what they used in 2014, and much of that increase came from AI workloads. Analysts warn that by 2027, AI could demand up to 6.6 billion cubic meters of water worldwide, more than half the annual water withdrawal of the United Kingdom. Supporters argue that data centers are not just about storage, but about the future of American innovation. Artificial intelligence may decide which countries lead the world in the 21st century. Opponents counter that it is reckless to build such water-hungry facilities in one of the driest places in North America. This new layer of consumption forces the region to face choices that go beyond simple survival. If farms lose their water, food security collapses, and cities will suffer with them. If cities cannot expand, jobs and economies shrink. If technology is starved, the nation risks losing its place as a global leader in innovation. So what do you think? Who should America choose when the Colorado River cannot supply everyone, the farms, the cities, or the data centers? Share your opinion in the comments. Now please take a moment to hit that like button. It's a small action, but it helps YouTube's algorithm promote our videos to a wider audience. Water wars. From the moment the Colorado River was divided on paper, conflict was inevitable. In 1922, the Colorado River Compact was signed in Santa Fe, splitting the basin between the upper basin states of Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Wyoming, and the lower basin states of California, Arizona, and Nevada. Officials assumed the river carried about 15 million acre-feet of water every year. In reality, it delivers far less, and the deal immediately promised more than the river could provide. That miscalculation turned a fragile resource into a permanent source of rivalry. The first major clash came between Arizona and California. California raced ahead with canals to feed Los Angeles and San Diego, while Arizona accused its neighbor of taking more than its fair share. In 1934, the governor of Arizona even sent National Guard troops to the river to stop construction. No shots were fired, but the episode became a symbol of just how bitter the struggle could become. The dispute dragged on for decades until the Supreme Court ruled in 1963 in favor of Arizona. But California still kept senior water rights that continue to give it the upper hand today. Those senior rights are at the heart of today's battles. By the 1980s and 1990s, California was still using more water than any other state, while Arizona pressed ahead with the Central Arizona Project, a canal system bringing Colorado River water hundreds of miles into Phoenix and Tucson. The project secured Arizona's future, but came with a dangerous condition. In times of shortage, Arizona would be the first to cut deliveries. That compromise seemed manageable in an age of plenty. In today's era of drought, it has become a painful liability. By the 2000s, shortages forced the states back to the table. Temporary drought contingency plans in 2007 and 2019 slowed the crisis, but never solved it. In 2023 and 2024, 6 states lined up against California, accusing it of hoarding too much of the river. California responded by clinging to its senior rights, arguing that the law was on its side. The deadlock grew so tense that federal officials warned Washington might step in and impose a settlement. The battles of the river were no longer just legal disputes, but a test of political power in the West. The conflicts do not end at the United States border. In 1944, the United States signed a treaty with Mexico, guaranteeing 1.5 million acre-feet of Colorado River water each year. At the time, it seemed generous, but today, it feels impossible. Mexican farmers in Baja California complain that the water they receive is often salty and insufficient, leaving them unable to grow enough crops. In 2025, the dispute spilled into open politics. President Trump accused Mexico of failing to meet its water obligations on the Rio Grande and threatened tariffs and sanctions. He also questioned why America should keep sending water south when states like Arizona and Nevada are being forced to cut back. For farmers in northern Mexico, the stakes are far more desperate. Some already face fields that cannot be planted. The fear is that when the water finally runs dry, farmers may not keep holding shovels and hoes. They may one day pick up weapons instead. The Rio Grande shows how fragile these arrangements can be. Under the 1944 treaty, Mexico must deliver water to Texas every 5 years, but by 2025, it had delivered only a fraction of the promised amount. Tensions rose as Texas farmers demanded relief, while Mexican officials insisted they were struggling through their own drought. The anger on both sides revealed the dangerous potential of water disputes to spill into full diplomatic crises. The Colorado River could easily follow the same path if shortages continue. The conflict between India and Pakistan is often cited as one of the clearest examples of water disputes shaping security. Both nations rely on the Indus River and its tributaries, which flow from the Himalayas through the contested region of Kashmir. In 1960, the Indus Waters Treaty, brokered by the World Bank, divided the basin, granting India rights over the eastern tributaries and Pakistan rights over the western ones. Yet tensions never disappeared. In Islamabad, fears persist that India could restrict flows and leave millions without water, while Indian leaders argue that the treaty allows them to build dams and use the river for energy. During flare-ups in Kashmir, the threat of turning water into a weapon becomes part of the rhetoric on both sides. This case shows how rivers can become triggers for conflict even between nuclear powers. At the same time, history offers examples of successful management of shared waters. The Great Lakes between the United States and Canada have long been a test case of cooperation rather than conflict. The Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909 created the International Joint Commission to resolve disputes, and later, the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement focused on protecting ecosystems from pollution. In 2008, the Great Lakes Compact reinforced the idea that withdrawals should remain within the basin and not be exported to thirsty regions elsewhere. These frameworks did not eliminate every disagreement, but they prevented the kind of clashes seen in more fragile basins. The contrast shows that with strong institutions and mutual restraint, even vast water systems crossing borders can be managed peacefully. These battles are often described as quiet wars. No armies march and no bombs fall, but the outcomes decide who prospers and who declines. Courtrooms and negotiating tables have replaced battlefields, yet the stakes are no less real. Millions of people from Las Vegas to Los Angeles to Mexicali depend on the outcome. For the moment, the disputes are fought with lawyers and politicians. But the longer the crisis drags on, the harder it becomes to guarantee that violence will never enter the picture. Who should give up water first when shortages deepen? California with its senior rights, Arizona's farmers, or booming desert cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix? Share your opinion in the comments. Share this video on X and Facebook to help us grow. Every share counts. Now it's time to find out the correct answer to the quiz. What U.S. state is home to the largest desalination plant in the country? A. California. B. Texas. C. Florida. D. Hawaii. The correct answer is A. California. What's ahead? The future of the Colorado River will not be decided only by cuts and conflicts. Around the world, other nations facing scarcity have already turned to solutions that once sounded impossible. Their experience shows that survival is possible, but only if societies are ready to change at a fundamental level. The clearest example comes from Israel. For decades, the country lived with severe shortages, relying on meager rainfall and an overstretched aquifer. By the 1990s, the crisis reached a breaking point, with the Sea of Galilee dropping to dangerous lows. Instead of collapse, Israel made a national commitment to desalination. Today, 5 large plants on the Mediterranean coast provide more than half of the country's drinking water. The Sorek facility south of Tel Aviv is one of the largest in the world, capable of producing 165 million gallons a day. Alongside this network, Israel treats more than 80% of its wastewater, reusing it for agriculture. Crops once dependent on dwindling rivers now thrive on recycled water. The lesson is clear: scarcity can be beaten if leaders and citizens invest heavily in new systems. Other countries have followed similar paths. In Saudi Arabia, where natural rivers do not exist, desalination plants line the coasts of the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. They supply cities like Riyadh and Jeddah with most of their water. The United Arab Emirates has invested billions in both desalination and advanced drip irrigation, turning desert into green zones that sustain growing populations. These systems are expensive and energy-intensive, but they prove that even arid nations can maintain urban growth without exhausting underground aquifers. But desalination is not a perfect solution. The process requires large amounts of energy, which makes the water far more expensive than traditional river or groundwater supplies. That higher cost is manageable for drinking water in cities, but often too high for farmers, who need vast volumes for crops at low prices. There are also environmental concerns. Desalination plants discharge brine, a concentrated salt byproduct, back into the sea. If not managed carefully, this can damage marine ecosystems by raising salinity near the outflow. In Israel and Saudi Arabia, strict regulations and modern dispersal systems have reduced the impact, but the risk remains whenever plants operate at scale. This means desalination can be part of the solution, but it cannot be treated as a limitless or consequence-free answer. Beyond desalination, recycling is becoming central. Singapore has pioneered a program known as New Water, where treated wastewater is purified to standards even higher than conventional supplies. The water is used for industry, agriculture, and drinking, creating a closed loop that reduces dependence on uncertain rainfall. California has already begun similar projects, with facilities in Orange County producing enough purified water to serve hundreds of thousands of residents. Scaling such programs across the Southwest could offset some of the decline in river flows. Even more experimental technologies are emerging. In parts of Africa, solar-powered devices now capture humidity directly from the air, condensing it into safe drinking water. Villages once dependent on truck deliveries can now rely on these machines for daily use. The volumes are small compared to what cities need, but the principle could be expanded. Future versions might support schools, hospitals, or neighborhoods, offering a decentralized safety net during shortages. The United States has also debated mega projects. Engineers have proposed pipelines carrying water from the Mississippi River or even from the Great Lakes. Others suggest building a chain of desalination plants along the Pacific coast, with aqueducts moving the purified water inland to Arizona or Nevada. Each idea would cost tens of billions and face political resistance, but none are beyond the reach of American engineering if the crisis deepens. The question is not whether the projects are possible, but whether society is willing to pay the price and accept the environmental trade-offs. None of these technologies alone can restore the Colorado River to its historic levels. At best, they buy time and stability, giving cities and farms a chance to adapt. But they also demonstrate that collapse is not inevitable. If nations as dry as Israel or Saudi Arabia can secure their supplies, the American Southwest has the resources and expertise to do the same. What is missing is not technical capacity, but political will and social consensus. Will the Southwest survive without the Colorado River, or is decline already unavoidable? Share your opinion in the comments and take part in the debate. Thank you for exploring the hidden corners of the USA with us. Click on the video you see on the screen to check out other hidden discoveries on our channel.